Seward. Senator Mason.
Thanks, Acting Deputy President. Today, Acting Deputy President, the Senate is debating the repeal and the reversal of one of the greatest political cons ever perpetuated upon the Australian people. An edifice of, let me call it, magical thinking, completely divorced from economic and indeed environmental realities. A monumental, the world's largest, environmental tax with no impact, that's none, on the environment, absolutely none, but a significant and negative impact on the economy and the standard of living of Australian families. A carbon tax based on a lie that there would be no carbon tax, a fraudulent policy imposed on an already struggling economy by the unholy alliance of the morally vain Australian Labor Party and the Australian Greens. Only, Acting Deputy President, only Labor and the Greens could have claimed a big new tax would help the economy grow. And that's what they claimed. A big new tax would help the economy grow. Only Labor and the Greens could have claimed that a new tax was needed to save the planet, even though that tax would have absolutely no effect on the temperature or the climate. Only Labor and the Greens could have argued that Australia had to set the example and lead the world when no one else is willing to follow and kneecap their own economy for no gain. You might call it unilateral economic self-harm. That's what I would call it. In the end, Acting Deputy President, the tax did not lower the temperature, but it did lower the Labor vote. But the debate we're having today, Acting Deputy President, goes back more than just 2 years, when the carbon tax was first imposed on the good people of Australia, against their will, and without a political mandate. That's a fact. Today's debate represents a closure on 4 years of political madness that cost 2 Labor Prime Ministers their jobs, one of them twice. 4 years ago, I stood here in this chamber arguing against a similar harebrained idea embraced by Labor and by the Greens, the Carbon Pollution Reduction Scheme, the CPRS, also known as the Emissions Trading Scheme. During that debate, 4 long years ago, Acting Deputy President, I remember saying that it is an ultimate folly to try to rush through and pass an emissions trading scheme bill before the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Copenhagen and before our major trading partners introduce similar schemes. Seems pretty logical, you would have thought. But oh no, Labor and the Greens were hell-bent on pushing it through. As I suspected, as many people suspected, Copenhagen was a dismal failure, and the recent Warsaw Conference, well, that was a fizzer as well. Over the past 4 years, there has been no major international agreement, and I venture a guess that we're unlikely to see one in the foreseeable future. Moreover, none of our major trading partners, none of those resource-rich, trade-exposed economies have even remotely come close to introducing similar far-reaching and punitive schemes. At home, whether they are emission trading schemes or carbon taxes or whatever, none of them have. President Obama, he said no. Canada said no. Japan said no. China, India and Brazil, they're not shooting themselves in the foot either. Also, they said no. The European Union, here we go. Oh yes, the European Union. The European Union's carbon trading scheme, Acting Deputy President, for those who are felicitous with the literature, those that look at the literature will know this. It's an international joke. the European Union's carbon trading scheme. It's small, it's limp, and it's a corrupt market, useful only for spivs, speculators and organised crime, a bastard offspring of the gnomes of Zurich and the bureaucrats of Brussels. Thanks to Labor and the Greens, Australia found itself leading with no one following. At a time when the world economy continued to be in the doldrums and economic growth has slowed down to a crawl, apparently no one was keen to enter an international economic suicide pact. Surprise, 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 Acting Deputy President, that no other country on earth except Australia would stand up and deliberately damage its economy as the left in this parliament wanted us to do. And they talk about the big side of town. They don't care about kids trying to get jobs or businesses being created. They don't give a damn. They never have. Let's make it clear, very clear, Acting Deputy President, if the G20, and I hope the Greens listen to this, if the G20 were to decide tomorrow that it's a good idea that we should have a universal emission trading scheme or a uniform carbon tax across the whole group, I would say that Australia should join in with those major economies. I hope you heard that. I hope you heard that. If the G20 acts, we should act as well. I hope you heard that. But I won't be holding my breath, and I don't want Australia to be holding its breath either. Over the past few years, Acting Deputy President, I have repeatedly asked myself, why would an Australian government and the Australian Greens penalise its own people with a carbon tax? Why would you do that? Why would you? Why would you introduce a tax so pointless from the point of view of environmental impact? Why would you do that? Why would you penalise the working families, the businesses and the exporters? Why would you do that? Why would you do something so against the national interest, handicapping us, all these our trading partners? Why would you do that? The answer, I'll tell you what the answer is. I'll tell you what the answer is. It's simple.
Senator Wright and Senator Pratt, please desist from interjecting. Senator Mason, perhaps you won't need to speak quite so loudly if you aren't addressing the interjections. Thank you.
Well, Deputy President, of course, as you know, it doesn't worry me, these sorts of things. There's a pretty easy answer. Why? Why did the Greens, the Labor Party, gang up on the Australian people and do this? Why did they? I'll tell you why, Deputy President. The answer is moral vanity, as always. The vain belief that the left, the Greens and Labor, knows what is best, and they are the world's conscience. They are the world's conscience. And the answer, of course, is guilt. Guilt that Australian capitalism, innovation, entrepreneurship, jobs and hard work has made us one of the most prosperous and successful nations on the face of the earth. And the answer, of course, is self-loathing, or at least deep scepticism of the values of one's own society. Moral vanity, guilt, self-loathing, the three great contributions to politics from the left in the late 20th and early 21st century, what you might call the perfect leftist trifecta. For the left, for the Labor Party and for the Greens, both the ETS and the carbon tax were these great giant, they weren't policy, Acting Deputy President. They were just giant psychodramas designed to make themselves feel better about themselves, to demonstrate to the world how enlightened they were and how morally superior they were to the coalition. It was all about appearing, Acting Deputy President, to the Labor Party and the Greens. It was all about appearing in the next Al Gore documentary. Another photo op at the United Nations, more applause and more accolades from the trendy international elites, this never-ending cycle, a never-ending circle of moral onanism. That's what they provided. The left, the Greens, more so than Labor, have always been ambivalent. The Greens in particular, always ambivalent about business, so punishing producers and punishing employers, particularly in mining and in energy, was never going to be a major problem for the Greens. But, this is the interesting bit, but the working class was always the key Labor constituency, and there was no clearer sign of how the Labor Party has lost its way and drifted away from its roots than its decision to sacrifice the interests and well-being of working families so that the inner-city elites could enjoy that warm and fuzzy feeling of righteousness, superiority and moral vanity. The Labor Party were quite happy to sacrifice the jobs of the people they used to represent to cultivate the trendies in the inner city. Great. That's what's happened to the once great Australian Labor Party. No longer the party of Ben Chifley and John Curtin, now the party of the inner city left, vying, of course, with our friends of the Australian Greens. The left doesn't care anymore about the working class. Environmental utopia has replaced the workers' paradise as the great goal. The environment has become the new proletariat. After all, Acting Deputy President, polar bears are much cuddlier and much cuter than working-class miners or truck drivers. Only business, capitalism and progress remain as the traditional enemies, of course, of the Labor Party and the Greens. They remain the exploiters and the oppressors, and now also, God help us, the polluters. The left's tried, tested and failed vision of the world is still there. It remains, informing their rhetoric and animating their actions. That capitalism and Western civilisation and our way of life is inherently dangerous and destructive forces that have to be tamed. That's what the Greens believe. They believe that a government of enlightened experts like themselves know best. That individuals need to be subsumed for the collective, and liberty always to be sacrificed for equality. That's what they believe. Instead of fighting for a workers' paradise, the left, instead of fighting for a workers' paradise, which is what the Labor Party used to do, the left now tries to save the planet from pollution, from global warming, from overpopulation, from resource exhaustion and from nuclear power. And yes, the remedies are the same. The remedies haven't changed. The growth of the state, always more government, always more debt and always the redistribution of wealth. Always. Same solutions, different problems. Acting Deputy President, this debate has gone on for many years. For many, many years for some of us. And I've spoken quite a few times on this debate. So I'd like to finish, if I can, on a more personal note. Well, I'm particularly glad, perhaps one of the senators more glad than nearly anyone else, perhaps, to participate in this debate today, because it also, for me, brings finally some sort of sense of closure. During the turbulent few months, and you'll remember them, Acting Deputy President, 4 years ago, more than 4 years ago, I argued against the CPRS or the emission trading scheme in the coalition party room as well as in the shadow ministry. And together with my colleagues Senator Fifield and Senator Cormann, we were the first to resign from the coalition front bench because we could not in good faith support this policy.
Shame on you.
I was told by many in Canberra that I was disloyal, crazy and that I was committing political suicide. But I was told by my party members and constituents back in Queensland that the ETS was bad policy. Bad for families and bad for business, bad for exporters, bad for Queensland and bad for Australia. I spoke to scores back then, Acting Deputy President. I spoke to scores of party members. They were right, and yet they were derided by some, even in my own party, as the Peasants' Revolt or the Pitchfork Revolution. How I remember those times so well. And of course, they in the end had a far greater insight than all the political sophisticates around here. We've learned, haven't we, over the last 4 or 5 years, that the cultural insights of these so-called sophisticates, these elites, is often abysmal and so divorced, so far from where the Australian people are, from working Australia, that it is nearly unbelievable. They are light years away. I chose to listen to my party members and constituents, knowing that there is far more to their collective wisdom than the conventional wisdom of the Canberra political echo chamber. Since that time, 4 years ago, we have been proven right time and time again. Now we are turning the last page on this sad and sorry chapter of Australia's political and economic history. It's a victory for common sense in the end, and indeed a victory for the national interest. I say this for the Liberal National Party members and for the people of Queensland. This one is for you.